In the year 1656, a young man stood before the elders of Amsterdam's Jewish community. Prologue continues. When the ancients looked to the heavens, they saw order. The stars moved with purpose. The sun rose and set like a faithful servant of time. The earth gave food, and life had meaning. Because behind everything, there was someone watching, someone guiding. That someone was called God. But there comes a day, my dear friends, or those watching, when the heavens grow silent. The old prayers no longer echo back. The temples stand still, not because they've been destroyed, but because the hearts that built them no longer believe. This silence, not of sound, but of certainty, is where our story begins. Friedrich Nietzsche was born in 1844 in a small Prussian village called Röcken, a pastor's son, a gentle, introspective boy who loved music more than war, philosophy more than politics. His father died when Nietzsche was 5. The boy grew up surrounded by women, his mother, his aunts, his sister, all devout, all Christian. He learned early about faith, about duty, about sin and salvation. But he also learned about suffering, about how the righteous can still die young, how prayers can still be met with silence. That silence would follow him for the rest of his life. Now imagine you are Nietzsche at 20 years old. You have read the Greeks, the Bible, Schopenhauer, and the philosophers of the Enlightenment. You stand between two worlds, the old world of faith and the new world of reason. One promises heaven, the other promises progress. And yet, both feel strangely hollow. He begins to sense that Europe, his entire civilization, is living on borrowed faith. People still go to church, yes, but they no longer believe as their ancestors did. They repeat words, but the soul behind those words is fading. Nietzsche saw this as the great sickness of his age, not immorality, but emptiness. A civilization pretending to believe in God long after belief has died. And so, he said, not with pride but with grief, God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. People often ask, Sir, how could he say that? How could anyone kill God? It's a metaphor, of course, a philosophical diagnosis. Nietzsche was not speaking about a literal murder. He was describing what he saw happening to the Western mind. Science had replaced mystery. Philosophy had dethroned revelation. Reason had unseated faith. But humanity was not prepared for what it had done. It had pulled the foundation out from under its own house, yet expected the roof to stay in place. That roof was morality. All those concepts of good and evil, justice and mercy, compassion and love, inherited from Christianity. Nietzsche saw it clearly. If you remove the divine, you eventually lose the moral. He called this the beginning of nihilism, the awareness that life, as we once knew it, has no absolute meaning anymore. Now imagine this moment in your own life. Imagine you wake up one morning and discover that every value you were taught, every rule, every should, every ought, was based on a story you no longer believe. What would you do? Would you despair? Would you rebel? Would you create something new? Nietzsche's answer was not despair, but it was not comfort either. He said, now that the highest value has died, we must become worthy of creating new ones. That is terrifying freedom, my friends. Freedom without a map. When he wrote The Gay Science, the book that first announced God is dead, Nietzsche did not celebrate. He mourned. His madman, the one who runs into the marketplace with a lantern, is not mocking religion. He is crying out in grief, because he realizes that humanity has lost its compass and doesn't even know it yet. He says, What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Where is it moving now? Are we not plunging continually? Backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? This is not joy. It is the sound of civilization losing its center. And that, my dear friends, is what Nietzsche meant by the silence of God. It is not a world full of noise. It is a world that no longer listens, where people speak of values but have forgotten where those values came from, where we chase progress but forget why we want it, where technology advances but the soul stands still. He was not anti-religious in the way his critics imagined. He was anti-hypocrisy. He hated the pretense of belief more than unbelief itself. He wanted humanity to stop lying, to admit that the old foundations had crumbled, and then to ask the hardest question of all. If there is no God to tell us what is good, who shall decide? That question, my friends, is not 19th century philosophy. It is today's question. You can see it in the confusion of our politics, our art, our media, our lives. Everyone has opinions, but few have convictions. We have lost the voice of heaven, and we have not yet found our own. That silence, this vast, terrifying silence, is where Nietzsche begins. Not with the destruction of God, but with the discovery of a world left behind by him. And the echo of that silence will lead us in our next lecture to the marketplace, where a madman, holding a lantern in broad daylight, cries out, "I seek God, I seek God." Pause, 3 sec, reflection, low strings rise slowly. In one of the most haunting parables ever written, Nietzsche introduces a figure known only as the madman. He runs into a crowded marketplace, carrying a lantern, not at night, but at dawn. The light of the sun already fills the square. People laugh. They mock him. What's he doing with a lantern in daylight? The madman stops. His eyes are wild, but his voice is clear. "I seek God. I seek God." They laugh even louder. Has God gone missing? Was he hiding? Did he travel? The madman looks at them, and suddenly his laughter dies. Then he cries out, "God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him." Silence falls across the square. The laughter fades into the wind. Nietzsche's madman is not insane. He is the only one who truly understands what has happened. The people around him represent us, the modern mind, those who think we have outgrown religion, yet still live as if its light remains. The madman says, "How did we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun?" These are not poetic lines. They are the deepest metaphors of philosophy. To unchain the earth from the sun is to remove the source of light, the center of gravity, the force that gave direction to everything we once believed. It is to float endlessly in the cold space of meaninglessness. When Nietzsche said God is dead, he wasn't celebrating, he was warning. He was not rejoicing in the death of religion, he was mourning the loss of certainty. He saw that modern man had built his entire civilization upon Christian values, the ideas of love, forgiveness, truth, humility, yet no longer believed in the divine authority that once justified them. We had killed the source, but we still expected the river to flow. Nietzsche knew that couldn't last forever. Without the foundation, the moral structure would soon crumble, and he asked, when it does, what will replace it? He speaks not with pride, but with terror, because to kill God is not to destroy a being in the sky. It is to destroy the very meaning of meaning. He says, "What festivals of atonement, What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? In other words, if humanity has killed its highest value, what new value could possibly take its place? Who are we now? The killers of eternity. The crowd still doesn't understand him. They laugh again, thinking it's madness. They don't realize that they are the ones who are lost. So the madman smashes his lantern on the ground. The light goes out. And he says quietly, "I have come too early. This tremendous event is still on its way. The lightning and the thunder need time. The light of the stars needs time. Deeds, though done, need time to be seen and heard." Then he turns and disappears into the darkness. When God dies, his shadow lingers. Nietzsche looked at Europe in the late 19th century and saw that although faith had collapsed, morality remained. People no longer believed in divine judgment, but they still spoke of good and evil. They still praised compassion, still condemned cruelty, still worshipped progress, but they could no longer explain why. It was as if humanity had turned off the sun, yet still expected the day to be bright. He wrote, "When one gives up the Christian faith, one pulls the right to Christian morality out from under one's feet. This morality is by no means self-evident. By breaking away from Christianity, one pulls the foundation out of the entire moral system." To Nietzsche, that was the heart of the crisis. Not that people became wicked, but that they became confused. He called it the shadow of God. Imagine the sun setting. The object that cast the shadow is gone, but the outline still lies across the earth for a while. That was modern morality, a silhouette of the divine still visible but fading. We still said, "Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not lie, love thy neighbor." But to Nietzsche, these were no longer commandments, only habits. They had lost their transcendent source. Without God, morality becomes not truth, but tradition, something we obey out of comfort, not conviction. And he feared what would follow when the shadow finally disappeared. Because once you remove the divine anchor, right and wrong become questions of perspective. What is evil to one culture becomes heroism to another. What one age condemns, another celebrates. Without a higher judge, every man becomes his own law. This is not freedom, Nietzsche warned. It is chaos. He saw it coming like a storm, and he called it nihilism. The belief that there are no objective values, that everything is permitted because nothing has meaning. And here lies the paradox. People crave morality, but they also crave freedom from it. They want to be righteous, but on their own terms. Nietzsche saw that tension inside every modern soul, the longing for purpose and the desire to be free of its chains. To understand this more deeply, we must see how Nietzsche viewed the origin of morality itself. He divided human morality into two ancient instincts, master morality and slave morality. Master morality, he said, comes from strength, from the noble, the courageous, the creative. It celebrates what is life-affirming, power, courage, pride, achievement. To the masters, good simply means noble, beautiful, strong. Slave morality, on the other hand, comes from weakness, from those who are oppressed, resentful, powerless. It reverses the values of the strong. It calls humility good and pride evil. It calls weakness virtue and power sin. Nietzsche claimed that Christianity transformed slave morality into a religion, a morality born from resentment, from the desire to make the powerful feel guilty, to turn strength into shame. He called this the transvaluation of values, the great inversion that changed how the West understood good and evil. You don't have to agree with him to see his brilliance. He was not mocking compassion itself. He was questioning the motive behind it. Do we love our neighbor because it's right, or because we are afraid not to? Do we forgive out of strength, or because we have no other choice? These are the uncomfortable questions Nietzsche forced us to face. He believed that most morality was a mask, a disguise for fear, envy, or weakness. That people preach virtue when they are powerless and hide resentment behind the language of love. That is why he wrote with such fire, to strip away the masks, to force humanity to stand naked before its own motives. Nietzsche saw morality not as truth, but as a kind of art, a creation, a story we tell ourselves to survive. And like any art, it can elevate or enslave us. When morality is born from fear, it makes us small, guilty, obedient. When it is born from power, from creation, courage and self-mastery, it becomes a force of life. He didn't want a world without morals. He wanted a world with new morals, created by humans, not handed down from heaven. To him, the greatest artist is not the painter or the poet, but the human being who sculpts their own soul. He said, "We, however, want to become those we are, the new, the unique, the incomparable." That is what it means to step out of the shadow. But Nietzsche also knew the danger. To create one's own values is to carry the weight of a God without the comfort of a God's forgiveness. Most people, he said, are not ready for that burden. They would rather live in borrowed values than risk inventing their own. And so they cling to the shadow, pretending it is still the sun. That is why he warned that the coming centuries would be an age of moral confusion, an age when people would worship progress, science, equality, but without any higher reason for doing so. They would believe in humanity, but not in the source of humanity's worth. He saw it all. The moral relativism, the identity crises, the endless arguments over what is right or wrong, each person claiming to be the center of truth. He predicted that when the shadow finally fades, a new darkness would fall, the darkness of the void. And in that void, only two kinds of people would remain: those who despair because nothing matters, and those who create because nothing is given. That is the threshold where Nietzsche stands in our story. He looks into the abyss and refuses to turn away. He knows that once the shadow of God is gone, humanity must either perish in meaninglessness or rise to create new meaning from within. That rise, that rebirth, is what he calls the will to power. Not the will to dominate, but the will to become. And in the next chapter, we shall enter that heart of fire, where meaning dies and creation begins. There is a strange moment in every civilization, the moment when it begins to doubt the very ground it stands upon. Nietzsche saw that moment arriving. For thousands of years, people believed that truth was eternal, a divine law written into the universe, a light from heaven that human reason could reflect. But what happens when the heavens go silent and that light no longer shines? When you remove God, you remove not only moral law, but the very concept of absolute truth. The age of faith had promised certainty. The age of reason promised progress. But neither could answer the cry that still haunts the modern soul. What is true, and how can I know it? Nietzsche was not just attacking religion. He was dismantling the entire structure of Western thought. From Plato to Descartes, philosophers had built a temple to truth, a realm of pure ideas, unchanging and eternal, beyond the noise of human opinion. Plato called it the world of forms. Christianity called it heaven. The Enlightenment called it reason. Each, in its own way, said, there is something beyond us that guarantees truth. Nietzsche stepped forward and said, what if there isn't? He wrote, there are no eternal facts. just as there are no absolute truths. At first glance, this sounds like chaos, as if Nietzsche were denying reality itself. But look closer, and you'll see something more subtle, more unsettling. He was not saying that nothing exists. He was saying that our interpretation of what exists is always human, always colored by our instincts, our needs, our power. He believed that truth, as we speak it, is not a mirror of the world, but a creation of the mind. That we do not discover truth, we invent it, and then forget that we were the inventors. He compared truth to a coin that has lost its imprint. At first, it was freshly minted, a symbol of exchange, a way for people to share understanding. But over time, it was passed from hand to hand, worn down until the face of the king was gone, and people began to call the metal itself truth. What began as a metaphor was mistaken for reality. That is how all our truths begin, Nietzsche said, as useful illusions. We create them to survive, to make sense of chaos, and then we begin to worship them as if they were divine. This, he warned, is the ultimate danger, not falsehood, but the forgetting that truth itself is human-made. It is not lies that enslave us, but our desperate need for certainty. When a person or a society cannot live without absolute truth, it will invent one, whether in religion, ideology, or even science. It will build systems, dogmas, movements, and it will call them truth. But Nietzsche saw that all such systems eventually turn to dust, because behind every truth is the will that created it. He said, "Truths are illusions which we have forgotten are illusions." And so he urged us to look deeper, to see truth not as revelation, but as power. Every civilization defines truth in a way that protects its own strength. The church defends divine law, the empire defends order, the scientist defends reason, the merchant defends profit, the activist defends justice. Each believes their truth is eternal, and yet each truth serves a will beneath it. This he called the will to power, the inner force that drives all living things to expand, to express, to impose their form upon the world. Even the pursuit of knowledge, Nietzsche said, is not purely innocent. We seek truth not because we love it, but because we want control. We want to master uncertainty. But when the old gods of truth fall, when science reveals the universe to be vast, indifferent, and silent, when reason itself begins to doubt its own objectivity, what remains? Nietzsche foresaw an age not of ignorance, but of overknowledge. He predicted the coming of a world flooded with information, yet starved for meaning. A world where everyone knows something, but few understand anything. Where every opinion is treated as truth, and truth itself becomes a matter of taste. Does that sound familiar? We live today in the very world Nietzsche described, an age of endless data and endless confusion, an age of opinions louder than wisdom, an age where truth bends to emotion and conviction depends on the crowd. Nietzsche's prophecy is not about the death of religion, it is about the death of objectivity. He warned that when truth becomes relative, the world will fracture into tribes, each with its own moral code, each convinced it alone is right, each shouting across the void at the others. And what follows that, he said, is the abyss. If this journey through light and shadow is speaking to your mind and heart, my friends, pause for a moment and help the light travel farther. Subscribe to PHI Chronicles and share this reflection with others who seek wisdom. Because truth, when shared, does not fade in the darkness. It multiplies until the whole world glows. He writes, "He who fights with monsters should see to it that he himself does not become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. This single sentence contains the entire tragedy of the modern soul. The abyss, what is it? It is not hell. It is not chaos. It is not the underworld of religion. The abyss is the emptiness left behind when certainty dies. It is the moment when every meaning you once trusted falls away like old scaffolding, and you stand alone in the vast, cold silence of the universe, with no God to watch you, no law to guide you, no eternal truth to hold you. For Nietzsche, this was not a metaphor. It was a real psychological experience, a kind of spiritual vertigo. He saw it in himself, and he saw it coming for humanity. Every civilization, he said, eventually faces its abyss, the moment when it realizes that its gods were only its own reflections. The Greeks faced it when their myths collapsed into philosophy. Europe faced it when faith yielded to science. And we today face it again, when technology replaces wonder and knowledge replaces wisdom. The abyss is not the absence of information. It is the absence of meaning. It is what happens when the human spirit, having conquered the world, realizes it no longer knows why. Nietzsche's warning, "The abyss gazes back," means this: if you stare too long into meaninglessness, it begins to stare into you. The void does not just surround you, it enters you. It begins to erode your convictions, your hope, your identity. You start to wonder not only what is true, but why anything should matter at all. And in that moment, nihilism is born, the belief that life itself is meaningless. To Nietzsche, nihilism was not a choice, it was an inevitability. Once humanity destroyed its highest value, nothing remained to restrain the fall. He described two kinds of nihilists: the passive nihilist, who looks into the abyss and surrenders, who says, "There is no truth, so why care?" who drifts through life numb, entertained, comfortable, but hollow. And the active nihilist, who sees the same void, but instead of despairing, uses it as a starting point for creation. The first collapses, the second transcends. Nietzsche's entire philosophy was an attempt to turn passive nihilism into active rebirth. He wanted to teach humanity how to look into the abyss and not be consumed by it. But he also knew the danger. Because when you lose all meaning, you do not become free. You become vulnerable. The human soul cannot live long without belief. If it cannot worship something true, it will worship something false. It will cling to ideologies, leaders, movements, to anything that promises certainty. That is how the 20th century was born. An age of false gods, of totalitarian systems, of ideologies that promised heaven and delivered hell. Nietzsche saw it coming, and he trembled. The abyss, he said, is not a punishment. It is a mirror. When you look into it, you see yourself stripped of illusion. You see your fears, your hunger for control, your desperate need for approval, your quiet terror of being insignificant. To face the abyss honestly is to face yourself without disguise. Most people turn away. They rush back to distraction, to entertainment, to ideology, to anything that keeps the silence away. But a few, a rare few, remain. They keep looking. And in that silence, something stirs. That something is what Nietzsche called the will to power. He saw that life, even in the face of meaninglessness, does not simply collapse. It struggles, it reaches, it creates. Even in the void, life still says yes. He believed that this will, the inner drive to grow, to overcome, to create, was more fundamental than any moral law or divine command. It is the heartbeat of existence itself. When the abyss gazes back, most people fall, but a few discover that the abyss is not death, it is the womb of new creation. Nietzsche often wrote that One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. He meant that before you can create meaning, you must pass through the storm of losing it. You must endure the silence where all your old certainties dissolve. The dancing star is what emerges on the other side, a self-made light, born not from revelation, but from courage. He believed this is what the future demanded, a humanity strong enough to face the void and say, "I will create my own dawn." But this transformation is not easy. It tears the soul apart. Nietzsche himself paid the price. He spent his life fighting the monsters of conformity, fear, and despair. And in the end, those same monsters turned inward. His health failed, his mind broke, and his own abyss consumed him. And yet, in that collapse, his philosophy survived, a voice that still calls to every person standing at the edge of meaning. The abyss is not to be feared, my friend. It is to be faced, because only those who face it can ever rise beyond it. Nietzsche believed that out of this darkness a new kind of human would emerge, not one who denies the void, but one who transforms it. A creator, a sculptor of values, a builder of meaning in a world that no longer gives it. That being, that vision, is the Übermensch, the Overman, the next chapter of this journey. When Nietzsche looked at the abyss, he did not see on death. He saw movement, he saw life, raw, restless, ceaselessly pushing forward. Everything that lives, he said, strives. The tree stretches toward the light. The storm gathers strength from resistance. The human heart, even in its pain, reaches for meaning, for power, for creation. To live is to struggle, and that struggle is not a curse. It is the essence of existence. Nietzsche called this impulse the will to power. It is often misunderstood. Many think it means domination, the desire to rule over others. But Nietzsche's meaning is far deeper. The will to power is not about control. It is about expression. It is the life force that says, "I will not merely survive, I will create." Every living thing, from the smallest cell to the highest mind, wants not comfort, but expansion. It wants to shape the world in its image, to leave a mark, to become more than it was. That, Nietzsche believed, is the core of reality itself. In his eyes, even truth, morality, and art are expressions of the will to power. The philosopher who builds a system, the SC,